next up we have Eric Baldeschwieler, who many of you might know by Eric 14. You've probably seen him speaking at at Hadoop summits, sorry. And the first time I met Eric was in 2008 when I interned at Yahoo and he was my boss, leading all of the people that were core instrumental in the early development of Hadoop. So really excited to have him here and have his support for the first Spark Summit. And please welcome Eric to the stage, who has a bunch to tell you about his background with Hadoop and what he sees for the integration between the communities and the projects of Hadoop and Spark.
Thanks, Andy. Great. Hi, folks. Just one more Yahoo between you and lunch. So as Andy said, I had the honor of leading the Yahoo team that took Hadoop from a prototype to what it is today. So I was at Yahoo for about 8 years, and then the last couple of years I spent leading Hortonworks' effort to take Hadoop to enterprise. So I'm a sort of Hadoop advocate. So this talk could also be titled, Why a Hadoop Guy Likes Spark? So Spark's actually been on my radar for quite a while. As Andy mentioned, we started collaborating with the lab quite a number of years ago, 2008. And then in 2009, Matei published his paper talking about Spark as an example application for Nexus, which became Mesa. So we've been watching it for quite a while. But then 2 years ago, a colleague of mine mentioned that, from his perspective, working with Google, Spark was ahead of anything that he'd seen there, substantially ahead. And we started to hear that Jan was having success with Spark and Conviva. And then more recently, we've heard that Yahoo's using it as well. So at this point, Spark is really on everybody's radar, right? We've got a lot of success stories you'll hear about today and early commercial support developing. So where does that leave us, right? So Spark really updates Hadoop in my perspective, right? The hardware has advanced substantially since we started the Hadoop architecture. Specifically, RAMs have gotten a lot larger, networks have gotten faster, disks just haven't kept up. So we've also learned that MapReduce just doesn't work well for a lot of very common big data workloads, such as low latency dispatch, iterative algorithms, streaming data ingest. You guys have all heard this twice already today, so I won't double click on those. So Spark takes these things, and it also brings a solution to these things to the big data ecosystem. It also retains all the advantages of MapReduce. Specifically, it has horizontal scale out and fault tolerance. So you get that, and then you get this sort of support for many different development techniques, which is very exciting. And what really interests me is you see all of this implemented on a very small, tight kernel, right? It's a small, simple API. It's easy to learn, it's easy to use, and it's easy to embed in other applications. So, you put all that together, Spark's really exciting and interesting. It's often better than Hadoop, as, again, you'll hear today. People are replacing their MapReduce jobs. They're getting huge speed-ups, big cost savings. But there do exist use cases where Hadoop is superior, right? It's proven to work at the largest scales. It's mature and widely commercially supported. There's a much larger ecosystem of solutions, users, tools, right? But really, I don't think it's this or that. As you've, again, heard a lot today, Spark complements Hadoop. With Hadoop 2 being widely deployed this year, Spark is now just another kind of Hadoop job on a Hadoop cluster. That's one of your options of deploying it. And Spark really leverages both Hadoop itself in that it can run in Yarn and it can use the Hadoop data system. It was built from the ground up to leverage the input and output formats of Hadoop. But more importantly, it leverages the huge investment that enterprises have already made in building and deploying Hadoop clusters. Right, so you're not again, people don't replace HDFS. They have to figure out how to get the data in, how to process it, and then Spark comes in as an alternative way of using and processing that data. So what are we looking at going forward? First off, right, it's really Spark and Hadoop. Right, you hear in the press people like to compare Hadoop versus the badass stack, but that's not really the story. The story is, right, Spark may be useful separately from Hadoop and may flourish independently, but there's this huge Hadoop ecosystem, and it's just gotten much stronger now that you can bring Spark processing to your data in HDFS. And in all the Hadoop diagrams that we've been drawing, right, if you think about it, I mean, we made a very conscious decision back in 2010, I believe, when we started the Yarn project, to really separate the MapReduce programming model from the resource management model. So at this point, MapReduce is just a programming model of Hadoop. But the core Hadoop stack is the ability to store your data and the ability to deploy a programming framework on top of it. Spark is now a programming framework that you can deploy on Hadoop. So you can use Spark, and it complements your organization's investment in Hadoop. So there's not a choice of Hadoop or Spark. It's Hadoop and Spark, and I think that's the obvious choice. The other trend that I see looking forward is really sort of this Spark as lingua franca. It works. The data scientists and developers working on big data need a way of sharing their work. Well, the thing that's really exciting about R, for example, is that when a researcher builds a new algorithm or paper, he doesn't just publish his algorithm in text. He publishes it in R. And that makes his algorithm immediately available to users across the world on their desktops. Right? They don't have to recode it. So Hadoop has needed such a system, and all the existing sort of MapReduce-based frameworks, they work in pockets, but they don't work in all these applications. So we look at Spark. I think it's the best candidate for this sort of language of sharing. Why? Because it's open source, right? And not only is it open source, it's in the Apache Foundation, which means that you can count on it being an open source tomorrow, right? It's under a foundation stewardship. It's expressive. As we've heard, it can solve the traditional MapReduce cases. It can also work on streaming, iterative machine learning, graphs, et cetera, and SQL, of course, which is very important. And it's easily extensible and embeddable. So I think that looking forward, Spark is going to be, sort of the lowest common denominator for developing and sharing algorithms in big data, and I find that very exciting. So a last quote, right? It's really easy to predict the future. All you have to do is look at what advanced users are doing today with the tools that are available, and that's all I've pointed out. All right, so enjoy the rest of your day, your lunch, and your snapshot into the future.
Thanks, Eric. All right, before you head to lunch, just a few things. First, I wanted to make a comment while we're all in a group, and since we'll be splitting this afternoon, about just one bit of background on what the summit means to us as the people who have planned it, and what we mean when we say community. And I'll tie that into the logistical announcements that I'll make right after this, which for us, I think community actually means it means all of the coming out of people who each have their own way of contributing. And so one thing that I love doing is planning like events, and so I found a way to volunteer and help. A lot of people really like writing a bunch of code, and that's the core of the reason we're all here. And the reason we do a summit is to think about what the name means and why we chose that name is to bring everybody together at one spot so that we can all figure out what everybody else is doing. And so what community means is a group of people that all have something in common and want to share that thing. And if we don't have these sort of events, then honestly we don't realize how many people are doing cool things with Spark. So events like a summit are really in the spirit of open source, where a lot of private organizations do cool things with a piece of software. If they don't come and give talks about them and have some channel to actually submit a talk, get it accepted, get it reviewed, do a poster or put up a table and tell people about it, then it doesn't constitute a community. And what we're really aiming for is a bunch of people who are all excited about the same thing, who all love writing free software, and that kind of mentality applies and trickles over. So along with that spirit, we put up a job board, because in addition to learning about new projects like this afternoon, and which we'll split into 2 tracks, and I'll talk about them in a second, you can also learn about what is available for opportunities to work as a Spark developer. A major portion of the audience here actually has experience writing Spark code, and this summit where it also represents the bringing together of the organizations who need Spark developers with the folks like yourselves who actually have the skills that those organizations are looking for. So if you're looking for a job or have a job opening, stick it on the board back there, the cork board, and then hopefully we can write a blog article about how much demand there is for Spark enthusiasts. Let's see, what else is there? There's t-shirts. Everybody here is entitled to a t-shirt. They're at the corner table next to the food. Speaking of food, we will be able to eat lunch either at tables here on the 3rd floor, the food's all here on the 3rd floor, or downstairs on the 2nd floor, there are tables and chairs set up for you to use. Please, while we're all here, please add yourself, if you're a Spark user, in a serious way to the Powered By page, which we only recently created on the Spark Wiki after we made it into the incubator. And within a few weeks of putting the Powered By page up, we had dozens of organizations who are talking about and want others to know that they're using Spark on the inside of their products and their projects. And you should also add yourself there. And you can just Google Powered By page. And then the 2 tracks this afternoon, the first track, track A, will be in this room, is about applications using Spark, and you'll see even a few startups that will kind of have their own coming out on the product side to tell you about how they're actually using Spark, and maybe you've probably never heard of a few of them at least. And I especially like reading about psychology and the brain, and there's a really cool talk about how a team of researchers is using Spark to manipulate the brain and study the brain. So it's a neuroscience research that's like cutting edge. In order to support that level of research, they needed to find a cutting edge computing platform, and so it's really this amazing application of 2 very different sort of communities but the cutting edge of both in order to get the results they're getting about like measuring neurons and stuff. So that's, I think, in the applications track. On the other track, if you're more of a core developer, and there's a bunch of other like products and really interesting things that you'll hear about here in the applications track, track A. If you're a core developer, you might be more interested in track B, which is going to be in a room behind me. That's a little bit smaller than this one, so about half of us can fit in that, half of us can fit in this room. And you'll hear talks more about like scheduling and core components and related projects that if you want to hear about like next generation things that are happening in the software, then check out that one. And we tried to time them so that hopping back and forth between the 2 would be pretty realistic or reasonable without interrupting the talks too much. Please try and be conscientious if you take a look at the agenda, not to cause too much disruption if you leave one in the middle or need to come into another one. And this hallway out here is the best channel to get between the 2 rooms. So I think that's all of the announcements I have. I'll let you go for an hour to eat lunch, and then we'll meet back in the 2 tracks after that.